Nice to be
Thank
here.
you.
I got in on Hildegard's presentation, which was igniting at the very least. It was very exciting to hear what Hildegard had to say. And what was interesting is that towards the end of her presentation, she talked about feeling that her experience was not anything special. And when someone asked me, what are you going to call your presentation today, Maya? And I said, well, nothing special. And then I think Sheila said, well, you have to have a title. I said, well, the title's nothing special. Because my point is to hopefully lead you through a story that lets people know that all this phenomenology and all the extraordinary stories we're hearing here are accessible to every person on this planet if they're aware, they're awake, their heart is open. So,
But don't you think it's also very special, each person's soul story?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I usually just say unique, but I think we've spent a long time, and you'll hear me talk about this later. I think we spent a long time making the experiences we're hearing about in this conference something so extraordinary that other people feel outside of it. They feel left out. They feel they can't join. And that's a lot of what we're trying to end as polarities on the planet right now. But
Right. And if you have a soul, which everyone listening does, that is special for me. Of course, it's nothing special, but it's also so sacred and so amazing that each of us have that spark.
right,
So
right, yeah.
that's
You'll hear towards the end, to
okay.
me, this is a sacred conversation. This isn't a phenomenological conversation. And it was really quite it was a challenge on many levels to not only be included in Sheila's book. So I'll always thank Sheila for asking me to stick my neck out and stick a chapter in her walk-in book, as I am a fairly newly outed experiencer. But I was the first wave of hybrids to come in. I'm 71 years old. I have a lot of story to tell. So that was really the challenge, was to say, how can I compress this into something really meaningful to the people who have chosen to listen today? And so thank you for it's so funny to listen to my bio coming from somebody else, trying to push it into one little tiny little box.
I know, of course, you're so multidimensional. Sheila, did you want to say something too? Oh, no. Okay. So go ahead, Maya.
Good. All right. Well, I'm going to just go ahead. You let me know if I do this screen sharing. I think I'll talk just for a second about myself again.
Mm-hmm.
There's no chance that I chose to be a person that went into psychology, because most of us psychologists out there are doing that just so that we can understand who we are, who our parents were, our dysfunctional families. But it was also a place for me to help unwind my own story, which was very private at the time. We're talking the early 80s. And try to put words to an experience I'm going to share with you today. When Sheila asked me to be part of the book on walk-ins, I kept saying to Sheila, well, but Sheila, I'm a hybrid. She kept saying, but you're also a walk-in, so you have to figure out how you're going to have that conversation. And frankly, that conversation inside me has been a 4-year process. I have known I'm a hybrid, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, for my entire life. I've been thanks to new terminology developed by Sheila, I'm a walk-in infusion as of about 3.5 years ago. So I'm going to try to help tease that out a little as I tell you some about my story, and also tell you what I've learned that I think can be really helpful to those of you who may have never validated your experiences, nor been able to speak about them to family, friends, or in a book. So part of my hope today is to encourage those stories to be told. So let me share my screen, see if I can do this. Can you tell me if I've got this right? Hold on.
You could make it full. Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Got it? Everything good?
Yes.
Okay, so I decided to call this Nothing Special because I believe that extraordinary experiences, especially in my own life, just became ordinary. And there's a lot of extraordinary experiences that we read about, we see in movies, we hear from friends, that ultimately can become ordinary experiences for all people, I believe. But there's some prerequisites for that. Most of the time, it's an open heart, it's an open mind. So let me see if I can encapsulate nearly 70 years of being in the story that I have. Embracing my story as a hybrid took about 40 years, and I was born a hybrid. I was aware of that at about the age of 5. I grew up in a military family. Military in the early 50s was really right after Roswell. My father was part of a experimental hybridization program with the military. I was part of that. I was a result of that. I didn't find that out until I was in about my late 30s, early 40s. The difference for me between hybrid and walk-in is a matter of just degrees, slight degrees. And most of it has to do with past and present. Hybrids are basically individuals who have both ET and human DNA. So it's a very physicalized expression of ET and human genome. Whereas a walk-in usually occurs later in life, sometimes more than once, which I know you've heard of from other people who've been speaking. But there's a contract that's made between the soul and another soul that happens before birth. And that walk-in occurs for a very specific purpose at a very specific time. And as Sheila has shared already in such an astute way, it can happen for a multitude of reasons and in a multitude of ways. So I was born a hybrid, and my walk-in experience didn't occur until about 3.5 years ago. As I grew up, I never thought that it was unusual to have beings in my bedroom or in the car or while taking a shower or at school. It felt like this is how everybody lived, was to hear and perceive the presence of something other than yourself. I believe, like so many people do, that this was my family, and that the family I was in was probably one I was put in for a reason, and I spent the first 15 years of my life trying to figure out what that reason was. But in essence, I called them early on my dream team, but up until about the age of 12, my experience was very magical. The team of guides, and they were mostly guardians. I thought of them as guardians. I wasn't here to learn. I was here to express myself those first 12 years. They saved my life more than once. I went to them every time I had a conflict inside myself with the world around me. I spent the first years of teenagedom wondering what the hell I was doing on planet Earth and whether I would survive. But most of the time, it was just a secret between myself and what my family might have called my magical world. But as I grew older, when I hit my late teens, the team of people changed. And I noticed that through the rest of my life, pretty much every time I made a developmental shift of any kind, a new group came in. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was now learning more about what my purpose was, not just learning how to be a hybrid in a 3D world. During growing up, my family, like Hildegard was saying, and so many others have, whenever I would just divulge that somebody else was in the room, or I'd seen something, heard something, I had some idea about what the future was, my parents, being as conservative religious and conservative military as they were, basically felt that there was a psychological problem. I was put on medication, I was put on diets, you know, all the things that people in the 50s would do with kids that are saying that they hear things and see things with parents who do not see anything other than 3D reality. So when I came into my 20s, after surviving all of that, I got my first group came in of teachers, and they said, here's what you're here for. You're here to be a transmitter. You're here to have a human experience. You're here to have the breadth of every possible human emotional experience that there is, because we're here to learn just as much as you are here to experience living in a human body. So I started writing in my mid to late 20s. I have thousands of pages of my experiences, what I've heard, what I've learned. But the main thing is that I had to keep it secret. Now, this is something I've run into with a lot of experiencers who feel that they have not been given their walking papers, so to speak. Before COVID, I had been on what was kind of a lockdown of my own, which is I was told in my early 30s that I was not to talk about, write about, share about, or even research about multidimensional experiences or any of the experiences I was having at that time. We didn't even have the internet. So I felt sort of in a cocoon for pretty much most of my life. And by the time I was in my 40s, I kept thinking, well, they're going to take the ban off at some point so that I can find someone like myself and not feel the isolation that most of us feel. Hybrids feel a great deal of isolation most of the time. We don't run in packs because we're here for other reasons. And it's only this year that I'm seeing having a chance to meet other people like myself. But during that time, I kept waiting, and my teams kept changing, and my reason for being and the inquiries I was making kept changing, and my writing kept changing, and information kept coming in, but I was still in this sort of lockdown position. And so by the time I was 60, I thought, I think I'm giving up, or I'm really pissed off about it, because I was slightly pissed off about it. I was like, my life could be over tomorrow, and I haven't gotten to have a chat about this with anybody. So I finally just succumbed to the constant, quiet presence of a very specific voice that just kept saying, all we can say to you is be patient. There is a timing. Be patient. There is a timing. And I was patient, and there was a timing, but it certainly took a lot longer than I thought. So what happened for me was that about 3.5 years ago, I was writing a book, and I was living alone with my 2 cats. And my constant experience is just as it is now. I am always surrounded by energies. I am clairvoyant, I am clairaudient, I am telepathic, but I don't see but auric fields or energy fields. I don't see usually any kind of specific delineated descriptives of the being in the room. I feel them. So that makes me primarily an empath. And I make a big distinction between empath and intuitive. So one of the things I began learning, and I had many experiences with in my life, was that there were times when some demarcated moment would happen and a real human would show up to deliver a moment, to deliver a message, to keep me from walking into the street and getting hit by a car, to keep me from having a car accident. So I would time jump, and I would be 8 miles down the road and not knowing how I got there. And I had those experiences often because a lot of times, you know, we as humans have very specific perceptions of how we experience what comes into our field. And I remember when I was growing up, when Contact came out and Close Encounters came out, I pretty much got incapacitated because it was the first media-based, entertainment-based disinformation coming through a movie. And there was if any of you saw Contact as many times as I have, in Contact, she goes into outer space. She's going to meet, she's going in and having some experience with an extraterrestrial being, but they present the energy field of that being in a recognizable scenario. That it was on a beach from Florida. It was her father that came to her because, as she said, why are you coming to me looking like my dad? And they said, well, it just makes it easier. It's a little off-putting when we come in different forms that are not recognizable, and we come in forms that you can recognize. So about the time I was starting to slightly run out of patience with the lockdown that I was under, this person came to me. And I did not know who this person was. I had no clue. But it had been during a time of really great loss and great stress. And I was eager to meet people like myself. I was eager to share what I'd been writing, and entered John Mack. And I had no idea who John was. The short story of a wonderfully long one is that I was sleeping one night. I woke up to go into the bathroom, was putting on some slippers, and I saw, and it was more of a murky, milky presence of a human. It was a human, and I'm not used to humans being in my house. I mean, I'm not used to seeing the dead, seeing spirits in human form. So I was upset because at that time I lived in a very rural, low-income area. So I was thinking, I think I'm not prepared for an intruder, but I could feel that the presence in the room was exciting to me. I was very alive at the presence in the room with me. So of course I just did what I always do, which is says, I don't recognize you, who are you? Very calmly, I hear a voice that says, my name is John Mack, and I've been given the privilege of telling you the ban has been lifted. So I thought, does he mean the lockdown is over? And who the heck is John Mack coming to tell me that? Why aren't my guides coming to tell me that? And so I asked a couple of questions, which I can't remember what, and he laughed and he said, just go onto your computer and you're allowed to find out what's going on in the world. You're allowed to find out about people like yourself. Well, I couldn't get my bathrobe on fast enough, and I was at the computer, and of course the first thing I did was type in John. And I know all of us have had experiences where we meet someone for the first time, and we might want to say it's a past life moment or a soulmate moment, but it's a moment where the recognition of the person is so deeply embedded in the heart of who you are that it's a kind of relief to have found that person. I've had more than one of those moments in my life, and I saw a picture of John and burst into tears, had no clue, still didn't know who he was, just thought, great looking guy, and have no clue. So I find that he has a life that was parallel to mine. My background in psychology is from Harvard. At the time I was at Harvard, which was millennia ago, at the time I was at Harvard for my master's and doctoral work, he was at the School of Medicine in psychiatry. And there was a year at the end of my master's that I had to choose whether to go into psychiatry or to go into developmental psychology. And I chose not to go into psychiatry. Therefore, I never knew he was there. I never knew of the controversy of John Mack, because John, and I know Alan has a book coming out that you need to know about, because John is extremely a pioneer for all of us that are on this conference today. He went in as a psychiatrist pretty much to debunk the abductee extraterrestrial phenomenon and probably create his own new pathological category in the DSM. And along the way, he determined that he could not do that. And he confirmed that the abduction story of the person who claims to be an abductee is a legitimate and real experience. This coming out for him changed his life, changed his career, nearly got him thrown out of Harvard as the fair-haired boy, because he was a very popular colleague and teacher at Harvard. And he had won a Pulitzer Prize for a book about T.E. Lawrence. And so he was the first person to bring a kind of legitimacy to the question of abduction back in the 80s. So it threw everybody, because up until that point, the experiences we're all talking about were considered fringe, were considered psychologically questionable. And John built a bridge, and John died unusually by being hit by a car in London in the early 2000s. And so we lost him before he could finish a lot of what he did. But his presence in my life was like an anchor. I felt accompanied during the first few baby steps I had after 65 years of not talking about my life, of getting into all my hard drives and unearthing journals and channeling and drawings and all the things that I've just been like accumulating for my entire lifetime. But of course, the big deal was, now what? Because I need to meet somebody that I can literally go give a hug to. And the name Miguel Mendonça came up. He was one of the most extraordinary people in my life. He had written 2 books on disclosure. He had written the book, Meet the Hybrids. And as soon as I saw the word hybrid, I grabbed the book, read the book, and sat in front of my computer, and I thought, I have to email him. And it was almost like trying to learn how to ride a bicycle. I was so used to not communicating that I wrote Miguel, and I got an answer, I think, from Miguel within a couple of hours. At the time, I'm in the US, and he's in England. And I get on with Miguel, and for the first year of my outness, Miguel really held my hand and helped me meet people like Mary Rodwell and know about Barbara Lamb and meet Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright, who you'll be hearing from if you haven't already, and start working as one of the directors for the Institute for Exoconsciousness. And I really credit Miguel for giving me some courage to be here today, because this is the very first course or class or sharing I've done outside of one-on-one before. And so John basically was my bridge, and Miguel was my bridge. But what happened next was very unexpected. It was like a firestorm to meet people like Hildegard, like Darlene Vandegrift, who you're going to hear about in a couple of people, and have them just treat me so normally when I had felt that my life was so abnormal. I was very much like Hildegard. I lived a dual citizenship. I had marriages and children, and now I have grandchildren, and I couldn't tell anybody. And so I just appeared very weird to a lot of people, but I lived inside of a very conservative life. You know, having Harvard background opened certain doors, having the psychological background opened certain doors, but I always felt like I was keeping a part of me, the biggest part of me, very secret. And now it was like how I built entire reputations and schools and businesses predicated on the absence of this story. And so it's been an amazing few years of trying to figure out how now to do that kind of integration. And so the next piece for me was totally shocking. I had moved to the northern coast of Maine during the dead of winter, when every single solitary small community in winter closes down for beach summer houses. Everybody goes home. And I decided to take one of these little winterized beach houses and write a book. And during winter, there's no one. It's like living in a ghost town. And the long story made short is that I was out in the snow. There was a lot of ice, and I felt instantly my feet went out from under me, and I felt my body lift up, this hand, this pressure slam me down onto the ice. And I thought, well, this is it. I think I've just broken every bone in my body, but mostly I was really nervous because there was nobody anywhere. I wasn't like I could call out. I had no cell phone with me. I thought, well, I'll either freeze to death or I will die of some sort of injury that I don't know how to name. And I laid there, and in that about 4 minutes is all it really was. I felt this flood of newness is the only thing I can say. It's a flood of something other than me surrounding all of me. And about that moment, here comes this rogue snowplow that shouldn't even be in my area. He pulls off, he picks me up, he puts me in the cab of the truck, he takes me to the hospital. And I notice that the entire time I'm going to the hospital, I'm laughing. I'm laughing, he's thinking, and I can barely move. I'm kind of all crunched up laying in the front of the cab. I'm laughing through the nurses and through the x-rays, and they've all been really grave and said, we think you've broken your hip and your femur and your shoulder, and I'm smiling and I'm pain-free, which was really weird. And I'm feeling like giddy at the newness of my surroundings, thinking I must have hit my head. I'm having some sort of delusional moment. I laughed through the whole thing. 2 hours later, radiology came back, said, we don't know what to say, but you have nothing broken. You've torn all the muscles, hamstrings, and all of, everything in your leg. You're going to be laid up for 6 weeks. And called a friend, came from Portland, picked me up, took me home. I'm off my feet for 8 weeks. And in that 8 weeks, I became aware of what I now know to be my future self. My future self, I've given a name because this is what he said. His name is Uban. And I have 8 weeks of solitude with this additional aspect of myself. That's my walk-in. Only to learn that it's really my future self from at least 300 years from now. All this time forward, there's been a loss of emotional body. There's been an extreme amplification of intellectual capacity, cognitive capacity. And so Uban was the part of me that became deliriously joyful at silly things like how to cut a lemon. I laughed because all these things that I've seen my whole life became suddenly much more awe-inspiring than they used to be. And now the way I talk about my walk-in self is I talk about it as, because I think the computer illustration is extremely helpful in how we all talk about energies. So it's like I went from a single processor to a dual processor. I have a dual processor, meaning my hybrid self is always intact. My walk-in self is just part of an integrated motherboard, And it isn't like, oh, I go over here and talk to Uban, and then Uban tells me something, and then I go over here and talk about it from my hybrid self. It is an interface. And what I learned also over time is that what used to be channeling and leaving ourselves, letting some other entity speak through us, channel information. Now we come back into ourselves. That process is like an old Macintosh. We don't need to vacate the premises any longer to be able to seamlessly interface with energies that either are collaborative with us or are wanting to speak through us or with us. We are an indispensable whole now, which is a really important distinction that I want to be making as I move forward in my life and in my story. So what have I learned? That'll be part of a book that's coming out in about 8 months called Doubling, to talk about what I've learned. But what I've learned is that my purpose has shifted over time. It isn't a static thing. Hybrids and walk-ins evolve into greater strength, greater awareness, greater understanding, greater expression of self. But now I know at this point in my life that my purpose is here to help people create clear and deliberate awareness of the reasons that every one of us are on the planet. And part of my reason for coming out is because I want to help people create that clarity, understand that purpose, write their story. I believe stories are sacred investments, that we have a sacred responsibility to tell stories, to share our stories, to write our stories, to listen to each other's stories. It's like oral tradition should never die. We need to be telling these stories because they are entities unto themselves. Every story that each one of us are telling in this conference has an energy field, has a homeopathic capacity to shift you into greater wholeness, greater wellness, greater integration. So I think it was even Alan that said something about how sacred these stories are, and they really are. And my hope is in the rest of my life here on this planet, I help people unearth that story. The other thing I know is that the invitation is very critical to multidimensional experiences. I think there's a lot of experiences that people have had and experiencers have shared that talk about feeling that they got surprised or sniped by an experience with an ET, with a spirit coming into their lives. And I would say that not one of those experiences is ever random, that we make contracts for these experiences long before we're born, and that they really just wait for the invitation because, number one, they're not here as our helpers. They're not here as our teachers. They're here as collaborators. They're here to learn also from us. The human experience is extremely valuable and important to multidimensional beings and extraterrestrial races. So the collaboration is, I think, what the Institute of Exoconsciousness is really eager to begin maturing our awareness that we are collaborators with a multiverse, and that multiverse is within everyone's grasp. But we have to first embrace the invitation. We have to have the desire. The other thing is that the extraordinary that's really ordinary is a phenomenon that is universal. This is a tiny little picture drawn by a 5-year-old boy in Zimbabwe. We can see children all over the world, as you'll see in The New Human by Mary Rodwell, who draw the same pictures all the time, who have the same descriptives all the time, who are bringing in the vibrational frequency for our future, which is the heart. You know, people said, well, what do you think your reason for having incarnated is? And my reason is to radiate the vibrational frequency of the heart, raise the vibrational frequency of the heart, because the heart is the great communicator. The mind is simply, as I think Hildegard said, simply a helper. It's simply our translator. And sometimes we don't translate very well because we're living in fear. This is the phenomenon of the planet, is that we are meant to be a heart-based planet. You'll see that this year we're making that jump, especially here in the United States. It will be with great cost. It will be with great turmoil, but we have incredible numbers of people who are willing to hold hands and participate in this shift that we've been talking about now for probably about 20 years. The other thing, because I'm a movie person, I didn't go into movies accidentally. I didn't wish to be a filmmaker or a screenplay writer just because I hadn't done it before. It's because it's one of the most powerful ways to change minds and hearts. It is a multiverse of its own. Film creates the capacity to generate feelings, ideas, and sensations simultaneously. And so I made it my business my whole entire life to watch I don't confess this to everybody, but to watch every single sci-fi film that there was, even if it was B-grade and horrifying, because there's always disinformation in these films. And the way that we know that we're hearing something that might be true, a premise, a visual effect, any kind of idea that is resonating with a greater truth in the universe, is we'll feel it. We'll feel it in our emotions. We'll feel it in a resonance of awareness and understanding of what's being said. And more in films is a place to learn what you really know, not what you know, but what you really know, watching a lot of these films. And frankly, Star Trek was, although there were all of our groupies, and I was one of them, Star Trek gave us a great blueprint of a lot of very important things that helped us before Carl Sagan really took hold to understand that we live in a multiverse and a universe full of beings and energies and experiences that are really all available to each and every one of us. The other thing I want to talk about, and I'm watching my time, so Sheila, you tell me if I'm running out of time. There is a phenomenology of contact, and I want to talk about the shamans for a moment. One of the places I spent a lot of time in my 30s, 40s, and 50s was inside of shamanism, because shamanism made it very easy to understand the difference between our ordinary 3D reality and non-ordinary reality, which is all the other dimensions that we have access to. Movement between non-ordinary reality and ordinary reality is a ritual. It is a process. I experienced that in my life. I experienced that the more I held the moment for the possibility of shifting from ordinary to non-ordinary reality, the easier doing it was. So my point in Nothing Special, and I appreciate Alan saying, yes, it's nothing special, but it's really special. I'll say, yes, it's nothing special and it's really sacred. That anyone can open to multi-dimensional contact, but it takes a few things to do that. One is you really have to believe it's possible. You have to believe that it's safe. You have to believe you're held and cared for in the process. And then the hard part is you have to believe the experience when it happens. And some experiences are quite breathtaking, hard to fit into our 3D reality. So belief is a really important first step. And it's not belief here, it's belief here. The second really comes straight out of the law of attraction, which has its merits. The desire for contact is deeply important. Wanting is different than desiring. Desiring means you can feel what it would be like if, in fact, you met your future self. You can feel the joy or the excitement or the curiosity of what it would be like to open to multidimensional beings communicating with you, or seeing a UFO, or channeling some amazing new technology that no one has ever thought of or heard of before, and here it is on your desk in your bedroom. But I think that the sacred piece is that you have to make the desire a spiritual practice. I think we think that multi-dimensional beings are just going to break into our lives on a near-death experience, or during some crisis in life, or when we're not expecting it. Well, that can happen. It has happened to many people, but I think if we cultivate our multiverse as a spiritual practice, the way we cultivate exercise or yoga or meditation, if you look at each one of those practices, it's to open to a larger self, a healthier, more integrated self. And really a lot of what we're talking about here in terms of multidimensional beings or extraterrestrial contact simply is integration. Each of us are reflections of the other. Every other out there is me. I am every other out there. And eventually there is no out there. There's just a seamless experience of the vastness of what is is possible in relationship to the larger universe. I am not religious. I came from a very religious family, but faith is a bedrock. I have had to spend over 65 years of my life having faith that the experiences I had, the feelings I was having, the people, beings, unbelievable downloads that came all the time were in fact entrusted to me and were in fact true. Until I could embrace the truth of that without a single person validating me, it was an arduous journey. The unseen and the unknown, we have been designed and taught, and our environments and our politics and our families have made the unseen and the unknown the boogeyman. And if you expect the boogeyman, you'll see the boogeyman. But in general, to me, faith is what I practice my entire life. The faith that there was a moment I would be having this conversation with all of you. There would be a moment that I would talk about what I know and what I see and where I come from and why I'm here. So the sacred event really is an act of faith. Here's a few things I know. Number one, your heart is a radio transmitter, and frequency begets the matching frequency. The more I elevate the frequency of love and compassion and trust and joy, mostly joy, hard to have a lot of times, the more I elevate that feeling, the higher my transmitter is, the easier it is for the multidimensional world to make contact with me. It is my sacred job to keep that antenna up. Fear is the opposite that pulls my antenna completely down, and I'm not going to make contact with much of anyone. Second is developing the ability to not doubt. And let me tell you, I spent a lot of time thinking, that can't be what you're asking me to do, or you can't be telling me that that is a truth. So doubting what you see firsthand is something, it's like a muscle that has to be exercised. The lack of doubt is also a spiritual practice as well. Let me move this over here. Also, there's a lot of retraining and reframing for those of us with multidimensional experiences and those who want to have multidimensional experiences. We have to reframe the world's idea of a negative fear-based thought, such as I'm afraid of the unknown, or the unknown is an unsafe place or a dangerous place, or there are beings that want to hurt me and kill me. It needs to be shifted to holding the flame of I'm curious about the unknown and I am willing to show up and learn. That shift is an enormous catalyst for contact. I'll say catalyst for contact. Second is recognize that 3D thinking and experience is very limited and confining, which means you'll feel confined and limited. So wake up thinking, I want to take a bigger adventure. I need to push the walls of 3D life out to the edges, then figure out what that means. Figure out for you, what is pushing those boundaries of our 3D life out to the edges mean for you. Invite direct transmissions. I talked about that a little earlier. Then believe what you hear. That's the hardest part, is that you can say, I want a direct transmission. I'm ready to write it down on a piece of paper. But what you hear can be so extraordinary and so challenging to so many of our limited belief systems that we just have to be willing to say, that's what I heard. That's what I'm putting on the paper. That's what I'm believing. Second is create respectful and open time to make contact. This is part of that sacred process of go to the woods, do what you would normally do if you went into meditation, make an invitation, make a space, make an altar, create the intention to make the contact, or to digest the contact that you've had, or to, that's me. Wasn't supposed to be that loud. So make the intention to hold the space for all of that connection that you're trying to make. All right, I'm trying to turn you off. Thank you. No. Thanks. All right. Dreams, I could talk about dreams forever. Dreams is a bridge. Write your dreams, invite influences and beings into your dreams. Learn how to listen to your dreams, learn how to interpret your dreams. Dreams are the royal road, not to the subconscious, but to the multiverse. That's my opinion. Then anticipate coincidence and serendipity. There's an incredible book that came out years ago. It's a little boutique book called The Art of Navigation, where the author decided that he was going to take a year of his life, that then became his life, to simply navigate by coincidence and serendipity and nothing else, meaning he did not move his feet unless there was a moment of coincidence, a moment of serendipity, a chance meeting, a chance animal crossing his path. And he lived that way for a year. And how that went and where it took him is an extraordinary story. It's called The Art of Navigation. So anticipate coincidence and serendipity, and it will be a guide. Trust, have faith, believe. That is an energy field that you will magnetize multidimensional experiences to that field. If they're waiting to make contact with you, occupying that space makes that contact easy, makes that contact joyful. And I think I just repeated myself on number 10. Okay. The biggest piece is recognize from the get-go that you are protected and you are loved. And lead from love, and you will draw in loving beings. Lead from fear, and you will create that reality, because we are in charge of that. And that's a very big story, because a lot of people have important experiences that for a very long time created a great deal of fear. And those are not unreal. They are important to look at and find out why that happened. But in essence, we can be in charge of our experience if we lead from love. We will draw in loving experiences and loving beings. The other piece that's really interesting, this is a cave painting from thousands of years ago, one of tens of thousands of cave paintings of star beings, of extraterrestrial presences, and they're everywhere. They're on every continent, in countless caves, on countless walls. So the idea that we are waiting for something to happen, that we're looking for multidimensional beings and extraterrestrial civilizations to join us, is a misnomer. They are here. They are us. They are among us at all times. We can make that contact all the time. This is a story that has been going on for millennia. The art of these drawings around the world is really an extraordinary archaeological journey to go through and look at what so many civilizations have captured on walls and on tablets to share with us the fact that they are already here. This is why I'm talking to you today, really. I think a majority of people talking in this conference have had some measure of need to be secret. I've been told to be secret. People have been afraid to tell their story. Others who have told their story have been isolated, rejected from their families. The secrecy piece is at an end. That's why we're having this conference of walk-ins or hybrids. The secret is ending. The disclosure is the end of the secret. It's not that we need more pictures of UFOs or we need thousands more people to tell their stories, but it's always good if we do. It's that we're all stopping the secret that's already been here. We've all been part of quite a conspiracy to make sure that these stories that we're telling here do not make it to the mainstream. But my job isn't the mainstream. My job is the individual I lived a very reclusive life inside of a hybrid story, inside of a walk-in story. I want to help people in that secrecy because it's what heals our health. Keeping a secret is a way to get sick, is a way to make us emotionally isolated and depressed. So ending the cult of secrecy is part of why this conference is happening, and I couldn't be happier to be a part of it. I have one place you can go. I have a website, interdimensions.com. You can learn more about me, what I do, how I bring all of my talents and gifts to the forefront for this particular cause. Or you can email me at my email.